Welcome to the Lost Vet podcast, where we are helping you to get back to your passion and purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Melodie Chan, and in today's episode of Destination People, I am continuing my discussion with Victoria Bond, who is a consultant and specialist in attracting and retaining talent. So if you haven't listened to part one, I would press pause, go back and listen to that previous episode, as we are talking about 12 ways to retain talent. In our first episode, we covered the recruitment process, the onboarding and induction process, and the importance of having a clear value, vision, mission, and purpose for our business. So if you're interested in continuing to hear what else is important in retaining talent, keep on listening. So we've brought someone in, they've had a fantastic onboarding induction experience. We've shown them what our values, vision, mission, purpose is, and also how they fit in.
Yeah.
And then what's next?
Yeah, so where I wanted to take this next was to talk about generally kind of culture and engagement and creating the right environments to work in. So this is about making sure that our culture is healthy. And this in itself, again, is a whole nother podcast. But this is about actually what I kind of want to get over across today is that there are ways that we can measure and check about this. And the way that we do it is through employee surveys. We write out to employees and say, how's the culture here? How does it feel? Where are the gaps? How do you feel about your line manager? How do you feel about recognition? Whatever's pertinent to the organisation, and we can check and we can get data on this, and we can having that veil of anonymity means that we can often kind of surface feedback that employees wouldn't give us in different ways. But whatever method you choose, whether it's surveys or whether you ask your team in a team meeting or whatever it is, I would really encourage you to kind of check that the culture is healthy, and more importantly, the culture is one that you are proud of. So again, we work with a lot of founders and owners who've grown really quickly and have all of a sudden found themselves with a culture that they're not proud of, because it's gone unchecked. They haven't, like I say, they haven't kind of checked in. They haven't actively managed that culture. They haven't stamped out the stuff that they don't want to be there, and they haven't encouraged the stuff that they do. They haven't had those lines of communication to make sure that they've had the information that they need, and they're relying on the hierarchy in order to kind of, create the culture. And before you know it, it's kind of got away from you. And that's when you start to hear things about toxic cultures, and you start to get bad reviews online about what you like, and you might start to see a drop in the number of applications that you get for a popular role or whatever it looks like. There will be signs, but I would really encourage you to be kind of proactive in terms of the way that you are in the way that you manage your culture, and make sure that you aren't letting the culture manage you.
Yeah, that's fair. Any signs that come top of mind of what makes a good culture?
Oh, good culture. I think, can I flip that on its head? And because the first thing that came to my mind is where you've got one of the really common things that we see in poor culture is, and I will get around to answering your question eventually.
Yeah.
But in poor culture, what we often see is where stuff gets escalated upwards and there's zero accountability. That's one of the most common things that we see in an organisation, is where actually people lower down in the organisation don't feel like they are empowered, or they don't want the accountability, or sometimes because they're scared. And so stuff starts getting escalated upwards, and we end up with a culture of kind of checking in with each other, or a culture where there's a process for everything and there's loads of red tape, etc. So I think kind of that good culture. If you're sat there as a leader at the top of an organisation, and you want to check in terms of how's my culture looking, I think that it would be how much of my inbox is with people checking stuff with me.
Okay.
How much, how, when I physically look around my organization, do people look like they're being their true selves at work, and do we have some kind of authenticity around, and we'll come on to that, in terms of kind of creating safe spaces. Yeah, do you know what? I could probably go on for quite a while about that. But yeah, I think that kind of good culture, you'll know it, you'll feel it, you'll be proud of the culture that you've created, and you'll also really feel it if you're not.
Yeah. I mean, even from my own experience, I think of one or two of sort of the high performing teams that I had the privilege of managing and leading. You have a team of individuals that they're problem solvers, they're doers, and they support each other. I mean, that to
Absolutely.
me was one of the biggest hallmarks, was just seeing team members supporting each other, supporting me, even, even as a leader, when they could tell I needed some help too and some support. But
Yeah,
just that, I think that idea too of, if you see that issues keep being escalated, and they're
yeah,
not, it's almost like this petty on the ground, they're not able to sort it out themselves,
yeah, absolutely.
if it's allowed to fester. So
Yeah. And I think that's a general thing that we see crop up in organizations. I think the other thing to kind of mention in terms of culture is there's very different cultures depending on what your organization does. So, if you're a sales culture, if you're a sales organization that's a sales engine, your culture needs to be very different to a business that's innovating and creating new tech products all the time. That's very different to a service industry, which is kind of, I guess, what we're talking about.
yeah.
So it's fine if your culture doesn't look like exactly the same as the organization next to you, because it probably shouldn't.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think it's again defining what is your culture and what does great look like for you in your business.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly that.
good. So
Right.
we've got culture and engagement, and then
Okay. So this one's about kind of diversity, inclusion, well-being, safe spaces. So again, this is obviously really related to culture. But this is something. So the ultimate measure here that we often encourage organisations to think about is, if we asked your employees, do you feel like you can be your true self here? You want them to say yes.
mm-hmm.
And we want them to say yes because that means that we've created a safe space for them to be themselves in the workplace. But also because, actually, quite frankly, coming to work and not being yourself is an emotional drain. And anything that they are spending on being something that they are not is energy that they could be putting into the work that they're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that well-being, diversity, inclusion, belonging, creating safe spaces is really important. Absolutely, if people don't feel safe in your environment, they will leave, and sadly they probably won't even tell you why. They'll just go.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might not have joined in the first place if you're giving off kind of signs that they're not going to feel safe in your workplace. Again, there's ways that we can kind of measure this during kind of using those anonymous surveys or kind of capturing feedback, etc. But I would really kind of think about, are we creating safe spaces for people? Are we creating a place where people can bring their best selves to work and do their best work when they get here? And if not, again, it's probably another podcast to kind of unpick that. But just spend a bit of time reflecting on that, I think. And, if you kind of come to an answer that isn't positive,
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe, you probably got some real work to do there.
Yeah. That's a holding up the mirror exercise, and just spending some time just reflecting.
Yeah.
especially if you are getting feedback. This one's a tricky one because you might not a lot of the times get that direct feedback because again people are too afraid to mention it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If somebody doesn't feel comfortable in the workplace and it's that deeply cultural,
Hmm.
they'll just go. That they're not going to make that uncomfortable for themselves mostly.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're missing out on a learning opportunity there, but it's not theirs to hold the mirror up to. They don't owe you anything.
Hmm.
Um, but I think there is that kind of self-reflection piece, definitely.
Yeah. I can see maybe that indicator if you're not getting that direct feedback. Again, if you're seeing high turnover in a certain role or a certain area in the business, I think this is one of those good checkpoints to really have an honest conversation with other leadership around you or just yourself too.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Good.
So, next section. So this one, I want to talk about career management, personal growth, coaching. So this is a concept that I talk about, and I might have mentioned it earlier about kind of creating fulfilling careers, about filling roles. It's about creating interesting work for people, but it's also about helping employees to see past the role that they're in. So what we're doing here is bringing it back to retention. We're creating longevity in somebody's career with us because they can see what the future holds and where they're heading. And this can be really hard, particularly in small organizations where they kind of go, well, I can't just create I can't create a job for somebody, but it isn't about that. One of the biggest skills gaps that we come across in the work that we do is line managers, leaders' ability to manage careers. Somewhere along the line, we seem to have lost the art of managing someone's career. I'm very lucky. Someone did this really effectively for me. I'm very fortunate, and I know lots of people who've been very successful who've had that great kind of career management for them. But I also know a lot of leaders who just don't have this skill set, and what that skill set looks like is having those conversations with employees, creating opportunities for them, being an advocate for them, and like I say, creating a career for somebody or supporting somebody in their career doesn't mean a promotion, a better job title, and money. It's about, okay, what people am I connecting them to externally? Actually, can I help them with not their next job, but the next but one job when they do leave our organisation? What learning opportunities, how can I stretch those people, and it can all be within that role. The responsibility that we have often as leaders is that when somebody joins our team, we need to make sure that that person leaves our team having grown as a person and in their career. And I think what's the kind of practical guidance that I'm giving here on this one, I think it's, if you aren't kind of proactively helping people to manage careers, that's when people go externally to go and find other opportunities because you haven't created them for them. It is a skill set. You might need to go and do some learning. You might even need to go and get a mentor or a coach or somebody externally to go and help you with this and to go and kind of build this skill set. But kind of setting somebody with that path to kind of say, look, stick with me, this is where you can get to, and I want to help you get there, is obviously going to promote retention.
Mm-hmm. I've found this often an interesting space to be in as a manager or leader of people as you're developing others, which is a passion of mine. It truly is being okay with letting them go, and I mean that in the
Yeah,
sense of you. For me personally, I derive a lot of fulfillment in just seeing people develop and grow and knowing they will probably leave your nest that you've created for them and
yeah,
move on to other things. And it's tough because you build up a team that you absolutely trust and love and enjoy truly being around. But you also know you can't just keep them forever. And that
Absolutely.
when other opportunities come up, to genuinely encourage them and to genuinely support them, I think is that next step as somebody who's managing those individuals.
Absolutely. It's that kind of, it's that old thing about, oh, I can't let you go and have that promotion because I need you here. It isn't fair, quite
Yeah.
frankly. But you're right, there is also a lot of maturity in kind of saying, you know what, I've done everything that I can for you here, and I wish you well. And I'm really proud of
Yeah.
what we've achieved together, but now's the time, and let me help you go and find your next opportunity. There's a lot of maturity in that. And there's work that we can do to make that easier, like succession planning, talent planning, etc. We might kind of talk about that in a minute. But yeah, it's kind of that real active career management is a bit of a dark lost art, sadly.
I think the other piece too is just thinking through. I know some people are really hesitant about quote unquote allowing somebody to leave, even just leave a business or even just leave to another area.
Mm.
Um and and for me, if that's the interest of the person, I've tended to support that with the idea that perhaps they'll go and learn, they probably will go and learn different perspectives, different ways of doing different things. And who knows, you will maybe come together again, at a later time. And what a gift that that person now has this additional experience, this additional perspective, these new skills that they can now bring to another place where you may join up again.
Exactly. Or you're absolutely right. Or just take the joy of being a leader and just be really proud of how you've helped that person.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I like that one. It's a tough one because I see this sometimes also falling into a check the box exercise where, oh, we've got to do the career review and where do we want to go and what do we build? And it's, again, I see it as something that should be an ongoing. You of course have to get your day-to-day business things done, but I'm connecting all the dots as you're laying them all out now, where if you truly understand that individual right from induction and know what their interests are, their passions, identify some of those skills or knowledge gaps that they have identified as being interested in,
Yeah,
then you can absolutely tailor this from just day-to-day things to bigger offsite learning experiences.
absolutely. And, if you, again, as a practical kind of thing, if you aren't continually investing in your coaching skills, I would encourage you to go and do that. That skill set of coaching is probably one of the most powerful ones that you can have as a great leader.
Yeah.
Um, which takes me really neatly onto the next thing that I wanted to talk
Oh,
about,
perfect.
which is about great leadership.
Okay.
And I think I cannot understate the impact that poor leadership has on retention negatively in an organisation. There's a kind of phrase that's very overused, but is absolutely as true as it's ever been, that people join an organisation and leave a leader, and it is
Mm.
absolutely true. And if you have poor leaders in your team, and these can be for all kinds of reasons, but if you have poor leaders in your team, I can 100% say that they are damaging your chances of retaining talent in your organisation. And if you're sat there thinking, oh yeah, I can think of, there's somebody who springs to mind there, absolutely do not put off dealing with that situation. They will absolutely be damaging your business and putting you at risk. And I think sometimes, particularly when we've got hard to find skill sets, and or expensive talent, if you know what I mean, it can be tempting to get the skill set in that we need and then ignore the behaviours or ignore the impact that they're having. And what we talk to clients about is kind of, we have a matrix of kind of the how and the what. So what we kind of share is that in order to be considered a great performer, you've got to be great at the what, but you've also got to be doing it in the right way. We kind of call it, if you are absolutely smashing it out of the park in terms of your KPIs, but you're trampling people down in the way that you're doing it and creating a toxic environment, you are what we would call a high performing jerk, and we shouldn't accept those people in our organisation. If we want to create the right environments and we want to create retention, we need to make sure that everybody in our organisation is doing the right things, the what, and they're doing it in the right way. And there's kind of no quicker way to get people out of your organisation than to accept poor leadership.
It's a tough one, that just that space you've just described, that specific skill set that you're really trying to find and making sure the behavior fits. But this ties right back into that initial theory or principle that you talked about of putting deposits into the bank account.
Yeah.
This to me ties right back to that, because even if you've got the right skill set, that individual will be withdrawing from your overall experience bank account.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see it. You will really will see it in your retention. You'll be able to spot in the data and the figures when you've got a poor leader and the impact it's having. And also remember, one of the other things that we talk about is, because those line managers manage multiple people, you're putting the responsibility on them to scale your culture. So if you're at the top of the organisation, you can say all you want about what culture you want to create, but you're then trusting those people lower down into the organisation to cascade that culture out through their teams. And if they're not doing it, actually what they're doing is they're cascading and the wrong culture, and that can be really damaging. And you will absolutely see, attrition as a result.
So here's a tricky scenario I'm just going to throw at you that's common. Let's say we have a veterinary clinic that established vet clinic, established people, and they're just on this journey of looking at retention, looking at being better at managing people, and everyone knows there's a long-standing leader who can get the job done. This person's been there for, let's say, 20 years, but that behavior has not aligned with really where they want to go. The conversations I hear is, it's so tough because that person's been allowed to do as they're doing for 20 odd years and not been called on it.
Yeah.
How do you coach people through starting that first step?
Yeah. So we've got to start somewhere. And usually the place to start is by sharing with that individual why something shifted, why it's important, and what that feedback is. So again, we often see that somebody, or that an organisation will go, right, unacceptable, and they kind of you just kind of push them off the edge of a cliff, and then what you've done is you created risk, and it isn't fair to that employee. If that employee has been working along for 20 years unchecked, they've got no reason to believe that what they're doing isn't acceptable, and they deserve that feedback. From a respect perspective, they need that feedback first. So that somebody needs to be brave with them and give them that feedback, and say, look, I want to support you to be better. Here's what the development plan looks like, but I need to make it really clear if we don't see a change in these areas now, this is going to be unacceptable for the organisation. I understand that it was acceptable in the past. I'm telling you now it isn't, and I want to help you to address it, and let's talk about what that looks like. Yeah. Challenging conversation, you often need evidence, you need kind of, courage to have those conversations, but well worth having, because if you think about, their peers who are also probably high performing, but are getting trampled on by this person, they're probably sat there thinking, what's it say about the organisation that we don't tackle this, that this is acceptable in our organisation? Is this the culture that we want to create here? Is this what good looks like? I'm not sure. I might go and find somewhere where it isn't acceptable.
In this second part of my conversation with Victoria, we started off this discussion on how to retain talent by focusing on culture and engagement. And I think you'll all agree that culture and engagement typically is something that you can feel. It's definitely a topic that's difficult to articulate and verbalize, but I think she helped us to think about knowing, when things aren't going well, but you also know when things are going well, in the sense that you've got individuals in the team that are problem solving, they're supporting each other. You can tell if that culture and engagement isn't really as strong as you would like, if there are lots of little things and issues being escalated higher up because people aren't able to resolve it themselves, or if there's just a lot of tension within that team. One way you can quantitatively assess culture and engagement is through surveys. And again, you want to make these relevant, and you want to make them easy for people to fill out. And you want to also show that you are going to act on these things and make sure that you are taking that feedback as you're going. The next piece she talked about in retaining talent is making sure you're creating a safe space for individuals. So can they come and be themselves? And I think that key driver she talked about of, if an individual can't be their true authentic selves at work, then you're thinking about that extra energy they're expending on trying to be something they're not, when that energy could be focused and channeled in on the actual work that needs to be done. And so being mindful of what sort of environment that you're creating, and again, it's challenging sometimes if people don't feel safe. They may not mention it. It may not be something that's actually articulated higher up. And so as people who are managing businesses, if you're seeing an area where there's a lot of turnover, or there's just something not quite right, you may have to just take a moment and gaze inwards and hold a mirror up just to see if there's something else that you could be doing better for the people that are part of your team. The next piece she talked about was career management and personal growth. And I really liked how she spoke about the art of helping to manage someone else's career, and also to be an advocate for these people. So when you've got people in an organization, you want to keep them engaged. You want to keep them feeling like they are learning and they're contributing and they're bettering themselves, and making sure that you've got the bandwidth to create this space for them, making sure there's these opportunities, and that you are okay to help create this development and growth that may take them outside of your specific team, sometimes even beyond your own business. And again, this takes a bit of practice. This definitely takes skills, and it's something that people, though, will remember for their entire lives if you have been somebody instrumental in helping, promoting, advocating for them in developing their career further. Finally, we talked about great leadership and the impact that great leadership, and unfortunately the impact that poor leadership, can also have on retention. And, she used the phrase that people join organizations and they leave leaders. That absolutely rings true. And so thinking about who you have leading these people, leading the people in your organization, and making those hard calls, making those hard conversations happen in communicating what's acceptable for behaviors, especially as people demonstrating them in these leadership type positions, and that it's very detrimental for organizations to continue to hold on to people that may have the right skill set but do not promote or display the same behaviors that, again, it comes back to, do they align with the values, the vision, the mission, and the purpose of the business? And if they don't, then this is where tough conversations need to be had, and a recentering of what is it that the organization wants to support and what do they want to do. This is just part 2. We've got the final part coming next week. Hopefully you found this helpful. Thanks for listening. Until next time.